Hello all, and welcome to the first topic lecture of our Summer 2020 World of Rome course. In this lecture, we will be introducing ourselves to the three cities that will be the focus of this course. Rome was the capital of what would become the Roman Empire, but there were many cities under its control. Two of these hold special interest for those who research ancient Rome, because they've been almost completely preserved due to natural phenomena. I am speaking of the well-known Pompeii in southern Italy, as well as the lesser-known Ostia, just a few miles from Rome itself. We'll start with Rome, the capital of what would become the Roman Empire. Rome is located about halfway down the Italian peninsula. The Apennine mountain chain runs like a spine up and down the Italian peninsula, and Rome is on the east side of this line. Rome is on the banks of the Tiber River, about 15 miles inland. There are a number of reasons why this place is well suited to be the location of a major city, most of which have to do with the Tiber River itself. Most large cities grew up alongside rivers because rivers provide irrigation for growing food, a source of water for drinking, a means of transportation to connect the city and its inhabitants to the wider world, and can serve as a ready-made sewage system for the disposal of waste. At the site of Rome, the Tiber makes a broad, C-shaped curve, and just below this bend is the Tiber River, the Tiber Island. The point below this island, sheltered by its presence, is the first natural crossing point over the Tiber, and as such almost inevitably became the site of a settlement. This river is also navigable by vessels up to small ship size, which meant that Rome would have good access to the sea and to maritime trade. The next important geographic feature that made the site of Rome an attractive one for settlement was the number of hills that were located close to the river crossing. One often hears that Rome had 7 hills, whereas there are actually more. Hills are another highly desirable feature when selecting where to build a city, since they provide natural defensive sites on which to build fortresses for protection and offer locations from which the surrounding territory can be observed. The 7 main hills of Rome are the Capitoline, the Palatine, the Aventine, the Quirinal, the Viminal, the Esquiline, and the Caelian Hill. One other hill of note lies across the Tiber, the Janiculum. The Janiculum is the highest hill in Rome and today provides a scenic panorama of the city. Here is a photo I took of the city from the roof of a building on the top of the Janiculum. In this photo, we can see the dome of the Pantheon, as well as some of the structures on the Palatine Hill. The Romans broadly organized their history according to the changes in their system of government. Just as a note, before we continue, your book uses BC AD, whereas I use BCE CE dating systems. The dates are exactly the same. BCE just reflects a non-Christian viewpoint. BCE stands for before the Common Era, and CE for the Common Era. Rome started as a monarchy, then developed into a republic, before becoming an empire is remembered as today. The most difficult part of Roman history is the fact that Romans had no written history until the 3rd century BCE. Until that time, history was recorded orally or was reflected in public documents. What has come down to us about Rome's earliest history is a compilation of memory that was only organized into a coherent narrative in the 3rd century BCE or shortly before, that is, in the middle of the Republic. Roman history is a topic that is best suited for a semester-long course, but it is important to know the history of a people when looking at their daily lives. So I'm going to give you the briefest overview of Roman history possible before moving on to the background and history of Pompeii and Ostia. First, let's talk about how Rome was founded. There are actually 2 foundation stories of Rome, the super famous one and another that is not well known, but they are connected. Long before Romulus and Remus, a Trojan prince named Aeneas, escaped the downfall of Troy with his father and son and the Penates, or family gods of the Trojan peoples.
I stay.
No.
My father will never abandon the city. I can't leave him.
Your city is dead. They're burning it to the ground.
Mom. What's your name?
Aeneas.
Do you know how to use a sword?
Yes.
The sword of Troy. As long as it remains in the hands of a Trojan, our people have a future. Protect them, Aeneas. Find them a new home.
I will.
Hurry. Quick. Paris.
This clip from the 2004 movie Troy replaces the Penates with the Sword of Troy. While the basic premise of Aeneas' story stands, go found a new city with Trojan refugees, he seems to be too young to have had a son, and Paris, Orlando Bloom, does not recognize his own cousin. But this is one of only 2 appearances of Aeneas in movies about Trojan and Roman history, the other being Netflix's Troy: A Fall of the City. With these and fellow Trojan refugees, Aeneas sailed around the Mediterranean until he landed in Italy, where he was fated to found a civilization that would lead to Rome. After fighting a war with the native Italian peoples, Aeneas marries the Italian princess Lavinia and founds the city Lavinium in her name. The entire story is told in detail in Virgil's Aeneid, an excerpt of which we will be reading later in the course. Aeneas' son Ascanius, also called Iulus, and this is important because it's where we get the name Julius, founds the sister city at nearby Alba Longa, and soon power in Italy transfers there. After Ascanius, Aeneas' son by Lavinia comes to reign, and power remains in Alba Longa for generations. Now on to the most famous story of Rome's foundation. Many generations later, 2 brothers Numitor and Amulius were given the rule in Alba Longa to hold in turns. However, Amulius decided he wanted the power all for himself, so he overthrew Numitor and locked him up. In order to make sure no one would try to take revenge on him, Amulius killed all of Numitor's sons and forced his daughter, Rheasilia, to become a Vestal Virgin, a religious post in which she would be killed if she had sex. However, the god Mars desired her and raped her. She became pregnant by him and gave birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus. Amulius decided to kill the boys by drowning them in the Tiber. The servant he ordered to carry this out was unable to complete the task and instead puts them in a basket in which they are carried by the river to that previously mentioned C-shaped bend, where they washed ashore. Their crying attracted the notice of a she-wolf, who, instead of eating them, suckled them at her own breast until the local shepherd Faustulus found them and brought them to his wife Laurentia to raise. Having heard of the exposure of twin babies to Longa, he suspected that the boys' heritage was noble, but did not tell them. The years passed, and Romulus and Remus grew up into young adults, and shepherds like their adoptive father. While celebrating the Lupercalia, a Roman festival, Romulus and Remus were ambushed by robbers, and Remus is captured and given as prisoner to Amulius. Faustulus is forced to reveal his suspicions to Romulus about his noble birth. Romulus then attacks Amulius and kills him. Instead of ruling in Alba Longa, Romulus and Remus give the power back to their grandfather, Numitor, and decide to found a new city on the riverbank where the wolf found them. However, there was a dispute over who should get to name the city after themselves, so they decided to consult an augury or bird omen. Each chose one of the hills of Rome, Romulus the Palatine and Remus the Aventine. Remus saw 6 vultures first, but Romulus saw 12 total, and it was decided that because he saw the greater number, Romulus would name the city. Romulus then began fortifying the site with walls and proclaimed that anyone who jumped over the walls was to be killed. Remus leapt over the walls, jeering. Romulus kills him and states, "So perish whoever shall jump over my walls." The Romans firmly believed that this event happened on April 21st, 753 BCE. Just last year, an Italian studio released a movie about the foundation of Rome, with the dialogue completely in a Proto-Latin that they made up. In this clip, you can see Remus jumping over the walls, which is actually a ring of sticks, and a subsequent fight that ends with Remus dying.
Pompeii trasise e autus poesit. Easy. Fidagis. Is never confusing. Okay. Vilim.
Romulus did 3 other important things to help Rome get founded. First, to populate his town, Romulus opened it up as an asylum to fugitives and exiles. These were all men, so in order to get women to build families with, the Romans invited the neighboring Sabines over for a festival. While these guests were distracted by the spectacle of the festival, the Romans abducted their women. The Sabine men were angry, and a war started that was only ended when the women themselves, some of them carrying or pregnant with babies by Roman men, interceded and asked their fathers not to fight with their husbands. Finally, Romulus established the Senate, the advisory council of the king, after he founded Rome by personally selecting 100 of the most noble men, wealthy men with legitimate wives and children, to serve as a council for the city. Romulus died mysteriously. Some say he was murdered, others say he just disappeared, but all agree that he became a god. So Rome was founded on the one hand by a refugee, and on the other by a fratricide, fugitives, and rapists. Very little of Rome's earliest history is certain. While it does seem probable that kings originally ruled Rome, it is unlikely that there were 7 with the names that are preserved in the traditional history. It is very likely what we have preserved is another simplification of history in order to explain how Rome grew into an important city. Archaeology has proven to be important. Excavations in Rome have shown that people were living on the site of Rome from about 1000 BCE. The settlement developed into a city during the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, the period during which Rome's political mythology asserts the city was ruled by kings. Romulus was the first of 7 kings in Rome. The others are Numa Pompilius, Tullius Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. Unlike monarchies we know today, the kingship did not pass down to the heir of the king. Instead, upon his death, a new king was elected by the people. For the sake of time, I can't go through each king's reign, but I will tell you some important information about a few of them. While Romulus's big contribution, besides founding the city, was to establish the government system of Rome, Numa Pompilius was known as the founder of Roman religion. Tarquinius Priscus is notable because he was not Roman, but Etruscan from the neighboring people in Italy, and all kings after him were as well. Finally, it was Tarquinius Superbus' son, Sextus Tarquinius, who was responsible for the end of the monarchy and the establishment of the Republic. In 509 BCE, during a war with neighboring Ardea, Sextus was hanging out with some other soldiers in their tents, and they decided to start talking about whose wife was best. But stories just weren't cutting it, so they all hopped on their horses and rode to Rome to see what their wives were up to while they were away. Most wives were found to be partying and doing things they shouldn't, except Lucretia, the wife of a man named Collatinus. They found her weaving amongst her slaves, being a dutiful Roman wife. Sextus immediately desired her for her virtue, but there was nothing he could do at that time. They all returned to camp, and the next day Sextus went back to Rome, snuck into Lucretia's house, and raped her. He threatened to kill her if she told anyone, so she said that she wouldn't. But after he left, she sent a letter to her husband, who happened to be on his way home with his friend Brutus and her father Lucretius. They rushed to reach her, she explained what happened, and then killed herself. Brutus, yes, the relative of that Brutus that killed Julius Caesar, enraged at the arrogance and pride of the kings, took the knife from her body and swore to end the monarchy in Rome forever. He led a revolt of the Roman people, which overthrew Tarquinius Superbus and banned his whole family from Rome. Instead of taking the power of the king, he helped set up a republican government, the structure of which we will learn about next class. For now, know that the officers of this republic were chosen from the families eligible to be in the Senate, that is, the aristocracy. And so Rome entered the early republic, a period in which she was busy with two things that were related: war and expansion. Between its foundation and the middle of the 3rd century BCE, Rome conquered the entire Italian peninsula. The success can be attributed to its superior system of fighting, the legion, and vast supply of manpower that continued to grow as Rome annexed neighboring territories. The conquered people were loyal due to the promise of receiving Roman citizenship if they remained loyal. After they completed the conquest of Italy, Rome fought 3 wars against Carthage in North Africa, known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War started in 264 BCE over the island of Sicily. Despite being mostly a land power, Rome quickly developed a navy to counter Carthage's superior navy. This war ended in 241 BCE when Carthage yielded and gave up claims to Sicily and Sardinia. The Second Punic War began in 217 BCE when a Carthaginian general named Hannibal, yes, that famous Hannibal, marched an army over the Alps into Italy and lived there for more than 10 years. Eventually, Hannibal was forced to return to North Africa when a Roman army under Scipio Africanus threatened Carthage. Hannibal was defeated at the Battle of Zama in Africa in 202 BCE, and Carthage was forced to surrender. In 146 BCE, Rome won major wars against Carthage, the Third Punic War, and Greece with the sack of Corinth. Previously, the aristocrats saw war as monetarily and politically profitable, but control of foreign territory as difficult and expensive. So after the Second Punic War, North Africa was not annexed. However, after the Third Punic War and the war with Greece, Rome annexed both North Africa and Greece and nearly doubled the size of their empire in 1 year. These wars marked the beginning of the end of the Republic. While fighting many wars abroad, class conflicts were taking over Rome. The manipulation of the lower classes became another way for the ambitious to gain power. Radical aristocratic reformers like Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who you can see on your screen here, tried to win power by making grand promises to the lower classes. This posed a threat to the wealth, prestige, and power of the older, more conservative aristocrats, and as a result, there were clashes. In 133 BCE, a mob led by conservative aristocrats murdered Tiberius Gracchus, and in 122 BCE, they did the same thing to his brother Gaius. These class tensions erupted into full-out civil war in the 1st century BCE, when ambitious politicians learned that the quickest way to accumulate funds, supporters, and armies necessary to dominate the state was through war. There are 3 examples of this. The first is the civil war between Marius and Sulla. Marius was a general who won popular support due to all of his military victories. He was constantly re-elected to the head of the government. The conservatives did not like this and therefore backed his rival, Sulla. Sulla defeated Marius in a bloody civil war, and as victor, he attempted to completely reform the state and put the majority of the power back into the hands of the Senate. Not many of these reforms survived his death. The second civil war happened between Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar. Pompey won popular support from the lower classes by working against the reforms of Sulla, only to be undermined by Caesar, who was just much better at winning popular support. In the end, Caesar's better armies won him the victory. The Civil War was also a period of expansion for Rome, as each man achieved their goals through military conquest. Soon, however, many began to think that Caesar had too much power, and he was assassinated on March 15th, 44 BCE.
Caesar. I know, Barker, I know, I have not forgotten. If I I may, gracious Caesar, you were going to consider revoking my brother's exile.
I'm still considering it. Take your hand off me.
What are you waiting for? No! No! No!
This clip from HBO's Rome shows the assassination of Caesar at almost exactly as it is described by the Roman historian Suetonius. He says that multiple senators stabbed him and that as he was dying, he pulled his cloak, his toga, over his face. All that's missing is the fact that according to Suetonius, when Brutus, the last person who stabbed him, Caesar is thought not to have said et tu Brute, as Shakespeare said, but kai su teknon, Greek for, and you my son. Caesar's political supporters were so powerful, though, that the assassins were unable to completely eliminate his influence. Soon, a third civil war broke out between Caesar's heir, Octavian, and Mark Antony, Caesar's top general, because both wanted control of Caesar's allies. Octavian won through a combination of shrewd politics and manipulation of the public opinion of Antony. For example, he really took advantage of Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt.
He's gone. Put him over. Sir.
Yeah? Oh. Salve, Verinus. How are you?
Good enough. Water.
Thank you.
was far away. All my life, I've been fearful of defeat. But now that it has come, it's not near as terrible as I'd expected. The sun still shines. Water still tastes good. Glory is all well and good, but life is enough, nay?
Glorious news! At Actium, in Greece, the navy of our Imperator, Octavian Caesar, under the command of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, has won a decisive victory over Queen Cleopatra and her slave, Mark Antony. The Egyptian fleet has been destroyed. Even now, Octavian Caesar advances on Alexandria, where the witch and her creature take refuge.
Apparently Cleopatra took fright and fled as soon as the battle started. And that cowardly villain Antony jumped in a boat and chased after her. Left his men to die for the sake of lust.
Antony's no coward. As soon as they knew they'd lost the battle, they fled to save the gold that they'd stowed on Cleopatra's ship. They planned to fight on, no doubt. They cannot do that without money. It wasn't cowardice.
It's not what my husband says.
It also helped his popularity that at the funeral of Julius Caesar, a comet was seen in Rome. People took this to be the deification of Caesar, and Octavian could claim he was the son of a god. There is no official date for the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire. Your textbook states that this date is 27 BCE, when Octavian took the name Augustus and was granted extraordinary power in Rome. However, some scholars, myself included, see the Republic ending with Octavian's defeat of Antony at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, which we just saw. Octavian returned to Rome after the Civil War, concluded by this battle, the undisputed head of the Roman world. Romans, who were so weary of a single person holding power that they assassinated Julius Caesar, were so worn out by a century of civil war that they were willing to let Octavian/Augustus have extraordinary power. He used his position to reform the state and society and is remembered as the first emperor. However, he never let himself be called emperor or king, preferring instead to be called princeps, or first man of the Senate. Many of his reforms sought to update the government and make it run more efficiently, and even though it put a single man at the top of the Roman government, his system was so successful that it lasted the rest of Roman history. Augustus was so successful in making Rome a successful city that his reign is often referred to as a golden age. He gained such influence that he soon began to be referred to as a living god. In addition to this, Augustus proudly announced his title of Pontifex Maximus on his coins, and several of his coins featured him on the obverse, and Numa, the king of Rome credited with creating the religious traditions of the Roman people, on the reverse. This idea also persists in literature of the time, of which there is a lot. For this golden age was not only in terms of prosperity and peace, but also in terms of literary production, aided by the fact that Augustus himself was a patron of the arts through his friend Maecenas, who gathered a circle of renowned writers around himself. A lot of the literature you will be reading in this course is from the Augustan Age, as this golden age is called, because there is just so much of it, and because I'm kind of a big fan. Famous authors include Virgil, Horace, Propertius, Livy, and Ovid. Augustus died a peaceful and natural death in 14 CE and was officially deified. The next four emperors all were related to Augustus in some way. This was known as the Julio-Claudian dynasty. After Augustus came his stepson, but heir by adoption, Tiberius, who was only really known for his reluctance to rule. However, the three after him are some of the most notorious Roman emperors. Gaius Caligula, often called just Caligula, was the first. There are few surviving sources about the reign of Caligula, and although he is described as a noble and moderate emperor during the first 6 months of his rule, after this, the sources focus upon his cruelty, sadism, extravagance, and sexual perversion, preventing him as an insane tyrant. For example, some historians claim that he tried to make his horse the head of the government, and there were many rumors that he tried to have sex with his sister. He was assassinated by the head of his personal guard, who then chose Claudius to be the next emperor. Because Claudius was afflicted by a limp and slight deafness due to his sickness at a young age, his family ostracized him and excluded him from public office until much later in life. Claudius's infirmity probably saved him from the fate of many other nobles during the purges of Tiberius and Caligula. Potential enemies did not see him as a serious threat. Despite his lack of experience, Claudius proved to be an able and efficient administrator. He was constantly forced to shore up his position, however. This resulted in the deaths of many senators. These events damaged his reputation among the ancient writers, who also claim that he was murdered by his own wife. The last of the Julio-Claudian emperors is the infamous Nero. Nero focused much of his attention on diplomacy and trade, as well as the cultural life of the empire, ordering theaters built and promoting athletic games. He made public appearances as an actor, poet, musician, and charioteer. In the eyes of traditionalists, this undermined the dignity and authority of his person, status, and office. His extravagant, empire-wide program of public and private works was funded by a rise in taxes that was much resented by the upper classes. In contrast, his populist style of rule remained well admired among the lower classes of Rome and the provinces until his death and beyond. Nero's rule is usually associated with tyranny and extravagance. Historian Suetonius tells us that many Romans believed that the Great Fire in Rome was instigated by Nero to clear the way for his planned palatial complex, the Domus Aurea. According to another historian, Tacitus, he was said to have seized Christians as scapegoats for the fire and burned them alive, seemingly motivated not by public justice but by personal cruelty. He committed suicide in 68 CE after learning that he had been tried in absentia and condemned to death as a public enemy. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty, sparking a brief period of civil wars known as the Year of the Four Emperors. For the sake of time, I can't go through every single other emperor after these first five, but here are a few highlights. The next few emperors are known as the Flavian dynasty: Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. One of their biggest contributions was the building of the Flavian Amphitheater, commonly known today as the Colosseum. Domitian was assassinated by a conspiracy, and the elderly Nerva was chosen as a transitional emperor to avoid another civil war. After this, there were no dynasties, but each emperor adopted the man they wanted to follow them as emperor. Adoption was a useful method of appointing a successor and was heralded as a way of having the most competent ruler on the throne. Nerva adopted Trajan, who adopted Hadrian, who adopted Antoninus Pius, who adopted Marcus Aurelius. It was Marcus Aurelius who shifted away from this adopted method because he was the only one of these emperors to have a son of his own. His son Commodus became emperor after him. The reigns of these adoptive emperors was the period of Rome's greatest prosperity. Political and military stability and success resulted in tremendous population growth and economic development. The empire grew steadily as well during this period, mainly as emperors sought to legitimate their power through military conquest. The later 2nd century was a period of major transition as the economy showed signs of trouble and the empire began to suffer from more serious threats along its frontiers. Commodus was assassinated and succeeded by Septimius Severus, and the Severan dynasty lasted until the mid-3rd century AD. Political and military instability characterized the second half of the 3rd century. A steady stream of usurpers seeking the throne led to nearly constant civil war. Almost every emperor and usurper in this period died in civil war, usually at the hands of their own soldiers, who believed they had a better chance of survival if they shifted their allegiance. These civil wars also weakened the empire's ability to face foreign invasion. The Emperor Diocletian managed to temporarily put an end to the downward spiral of the empire. To alleviate the pressure on one emperor and eliminate some problems with usurpers, Diocletian created what was called the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4 emperors. There was an emperor for each part of the empire: the Rhine, Italy and North Africa, the Danube, and the East. He also began an ambitious program of reform to the government, army, and society. The Tetrarchy was remarkably successful as long as Diocletian remained in office. After his retirement, and he was the only emperor to leave office while still alive, The remaining emperors began to argue and finally fought with one another, and the system collapsed. The eventual winner of this subsequent civil war was Constantine, the son of one of Diocletian's original tetrarchs. He continued the reforms to the state and promoted Christianity and helped to develop and unify and enlarge this early church. The Roman Empire continued in basically the same system for the rest of its existence. Throughout most of the late empire, external threats, tribes from the north, also plagued Rome. The Western Roman Empire finally fell in 476 CE, when the last emperor in the west, Romulus Augustulus, gave up his throne to the barbarian chief Odoacer. However, the Roman Empire continued in the east under the name of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire officially fell in 1453 when the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople. And so, Rome fell, and historians and scholars of the ancient world are still trying to figure out exactly why. But as I mentioned before, our focus will not be solely on Rome. Rome has been constantly occupied since its foundation, and therefore what is left from ancient times has most often been reconstructed or adapted to fit the era. A good example of this is the Pantheon, a temple built under Augustus, restored by Hadrian, converted to a Catholic church, and now used as a church and tourist attraction. This same constant occupation has not been the case with Pompeii and Ostia, because each city was abandoned due to natural phenomena. As cities under Rome's control, they do not have the same political intrigue as Rome. They were ruled by a Roman governor who reported to the head of state. The city of Pompeii is located just southeast of the base of Mount Vesuvius on the Bay of Naples, and Vesuvius is like right there. The city straddles a key intersection of roads where a main branch splits off heading inland from the coastal road. This was certainly a factor in its growth and affluence. Archaeological evidence suggests that the city was founded in the 6th century and that it exhibited early Etruscan and Greek influences, but Pompeii probably only began to assume its final form when it became a settlement of the Samnites, an Oscan-speaking people. By the 3rd century BCE, many of the main public spaces in Pompeii, such as the Forum and the street grid, had taken shape. The Samnites fell under Roman dominion in 290 BCE, but the city continued to evolve and prosper while retaining its distinctive Samnite identity. Sulla settled several thousands of his veterans in Pompeii and refounded the city as a Roman colony. The new Roman settlers spurred another wave of building activity, including the construction of an amphitheater and updated bath facilities. Within a generation or two, the old Samnite families began to show up again in urban administrative posts, and the blended populace advanced together in wealth, as revealed by the many fine private houses that dotted the city. This era of economic prosperity continued smoothly into the period of the Roman Empire. A new phase of the city's life began in 62 BCE, when the volcanically active region produced a powerful earthquake that struck the city, causing widespread destruction. The Pompeians quickly and energetically began to rebuild, but some wealthy families seem to have fled the unstable region, as evidenced by the conversion of some former elite homes to serve more industrial uses. Many of the wealthy inhabitants of this era seem to have been freedmen, formerly enslaved people, a number of whom commemorated their rise in status and wealth through the construction of sumptuous homes and monuments. The city at this time probably had a population of 15,000 to 20,000 and was one of the wealthiest cities of the region of Campania. The Bay of Naples area in general was a favorite vacation spot for wealthy Romans, and many of the elites from Rome owned summer villas along the scenic landscape of the bay. The repairs from the earthquake of 62 AD/CE were still incomplete when an even more catastrophic event overtook the city and the region. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted with such fury that the entire city was engulfed and buried beneath a layer of pumice and volcanic ash more than 4 meters deep. We're going to watch a video now that shows this eruption. It's kind of disturbing. It's also 8 minutes long, but it's definitely worth it. This time there was nothing to rebuild. Pompeii was simply covered over by the eruption, and the entombed city would not be excavated for another 15 centuries. Our other city, Ostia, is inextricably linked with the history of Rome, as Ostia served as the port of Rome. Its name literally means mouth, and it lies on the Mediterranean at the mouth of the Tiber River. Since Rome depended on importing overseas food for its survival, and the Tiber is not navigable by large ships, there was a clear need for a port where goods could be unloaded, stored, and then transferred into smaller ships or barges for the journey up the Tiber to Rome. Unfortunately, although Ostia was built there, it is not a site suitable for habitation. It is mostly swamp, which led to the breeding of disease-carrying insects. There was also no natural protected inlet or harbor where ships could dock and be safe from storms. Because of these drawbacks, Ostia developed more slowly than Rome. However, the sheer scale of the imports necessary to support the capital eventually ensured that Ostia was forced to assume a major role as a port, and also made it the focus of gigantic building projects intended to rectify its shortcomings. Legend has it that Ancus Marcius, the third king of Rome, established a city near the mouth of the Tiber to facilitate the mining of salt beds. It is unsure whether or not this town was on the same site as Ostia, or whether it existed at all. The first firmly historical Roman settlement at the mouth of the Tiber dates to the 4th century BCE, when a military fort was established to guard the entrance of the river against sea raiders. It was a small rectangular camp laid out in a standard shape around the intersection of two main streets. A civilian settlement subsequently grew up to the west of the castrum, the military camp. By the time of the Second Punic War, grain from Sardinia was passing through Ostia on its way to Rome, but due to the previously mentioned lack of safe port, much of the grain supply was routed to the port of Puteoli on the Bay of Naples to the south. This was safer for ships, but the overland trip from Puteoli to Rome was cumbersome and expensive. Despite these drawbacks, much traffic came through Ostia and the city steadily grew. In the 1st century BCE, a new set of walls was constructed, which enclosed some 65 hectares, clearly demonstrating how much the city had expanded since its foundation as a castrum, a camp. The old castrum had now been completely absorbed by the city and had become its forum space. Apartment buildings sprouted up to house the population of dock workers and shipbuilders, and numerous warehouses appeared scattered throughout the city to store the vast quantities of goods arriving from overseas. Under Augustus, a number of important Ostian landmarks were constructed, including the theater and its surrounding piazza, which were erected by Augustus's friend Agrippa. Under Tiberius, a large temple to Rome and Augustus was built, as well as public baths and an aqueduct. During the 1st century of the empire, a squad of vigiles, or firefighters, was established at Ostia, and a better harbor was built. Beginning under the reign of Claudius, Ostia experienced a boom that would last for the next 100 years. While the existing harbor facilitated the loading and unloading of ships, there was still no anchorage safe from storms, and more dock space was needed for the hundreds of freighters coming to Ostia. In 42 CE, Claudius tackled this problem and excavated a substantial harbor at a site approximately 4 kilometers north of Ostia. He dug out of the coastline a huge artificial harbor connected to the river and to Ostia by canals. This new harbor, known as Portus, was at this point not regarded as a separate town, but an extension of Ostia. Both sites were administered by the existing bureaucracy of Ostia. Portus must have provided desperately needed docking space to alleviate the crowding at Ostia, but despite this, the problem of safety from storms was not solved. In 62 CE, a storm sank over 200 ships at Portus. There also seems to have been an attempt to raise the ground level of the area, probably to render it safer from the Tiber flooding. After the devastation of the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, Nero ordered that all grain barges bringing wheat from Ostia to Rome load up with rubble for the return trip to Ostia, where the debris was to be used to fill in the swampy lowlands. Portus was rebuilt and given an inner harbor where ships could be completely safe by the Emperor Trajan. This inner harbor was hexagonal in shape, and the of Trajan's hexagon is still visible to tourists who land at Fiumicino, Rome's modern airport that was built partially over the city of Portus. In the 2nd century AD, much construction in both Ostia and Portus resulted in many more apartment buildings and storehouses, as well as new bath facilities and a temple to Jupiter. This phase of building included the widespread use of brick as construction material in addition to brick-faced concrete. By the 3rd century AD, a decline in the population of Rome, coupled with problems with the river mouth clogging up with sand, caused the end of Ostia's growth. As the volume of maritime traffic declined and the facilities at Portus were sufficient to carry the reduced load, Ostia began to lose its bustling industrial nature. In the late 3rd century CE, many commercial areas and buildings seem to have no longer been heavily used or were turned to alternative purposes. Interestingly, it is from this period that many of the large private homes or villas appear to date, suggesting that Ostia was being transformed from a predominantly commercial city into more of a seaside resort for wealthy vacationers from Rome. Under Constantine, Portus was administratively split off from Ostia and became its own city. In the 4th century AD, CE and following, Ostia dwindled. With its purpose as Rome's port gone, the unhealthy, swampy nature of the site once again became a dominant factor, and Ostia was essentially abandoned. And there you have it, the 3 cities that will be the focus of our class. As you'll learn in the literature lecture, we will be juxtaposing the evidence we got from the literature of ancient Rome with the material culture that the inhabitants of these cities left behind.